Hello, everyone, and welcome to the annual public meeting of the Canal and River Trust. I'm delighted to be here today hosting and chairing this event. My name is David Orr, and I am really thrilled to have been appointed as the new chair of the Board of Trustees of the Trust. I'm very new in this role. I've been in post for 3 weeks. And I'm learning a huge amount about the really great work that the Canal and River Trust does. I think, like everyone who is taking part in this call today, I'm one of the millions and millions of people around the country who feels a close affinity to canals, even without knowing a huge amount about how they all operate. Although my professional background has been in housing, this is an area that it feels very exciting to me. And as a regular user of canals, my impression before I got involved in this conversation at all was that the Canal and River Trust had been doing a really great job of improving the quality of the canals and the towpaths around the country and making sure that we are all able to gain as much benefit as we possibly can. The mission of the Trust is very clear, it's very straightforward. We want to ensure that we can keep all our canals and waterways navigable and open to boats, and we want to ensure that tens of millions of people can enjoy not just the water, but the towpaths and all the activities that you can do alongside. A blue-green corridor, which makes a huge contribution to the welfare of the nation. What we're planning to do today is to do something of a review. And because this is the 10th anniversary of the Trust, I think when we come to our Chief Executive, Richard Parry, he's going to be talking not just about the past year, but about what we have achieved in the 10-year life of the Canal and River Trust. We will then introduce some of the other senior members of staff of the organisation who will take you through some of the finances, some of the challenges that we have, but also the many opportunities that we have to continue to improve the network and ensure that more and more of us can enjoy what our network has to offer. And there will be time at the end for a Q&A, and there have been opportunities for people, I think, via email to send in questions in advance. And I think that email channel will be open to allow questions to be posted during the course of the event. So we'll make sure that there is some time at the end for those questions to be dealt with. And now, without any further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our Chief Executive, Richard Parry, to reflect on the Canal and River Trust over the past 10 years.
Thank you, David, and you're very welcome to join the Trust. Delighted to have you join us. As you said, this summer the Trust reached its 10th anniversary. It was a key milestone for us, a point on our journey as we develop and evolve as a charity. A time to reflect on what we've achieved in that time and to celebrate the progress we have made. Move to the next slide, please. As we were created in Parliament, the culmination of a long process with cross-party support, we invited parliamentarians to celebrate with us in Westminster at the end of June. And we're delighted that over 50 MPs and peers joined us. Many, like Waterways All-Party Parliamentary Group Chair Michael Fabricant, pictured here, making a pledge to support our work in the future. On the anniversary date itself, 12th of July, we hosted 30 events across the country for colleagues and volunteers to come together in a simultaneous celebration with over 1,500 people taking part. And we also invited customers and partners to share in our celebration across our social media and digital channels. Next slide, please. That evening, we brought together some of those involved at the inception of the Trust 10 years ago. Our first chair and former British Waterways chair, Tony Hale, CBE, pictured here, along with his Chief Executive, Robin Evans, other members of the original leadership team, and many of the partners who played such an instrumental role at that time. Together with the current board, council members and executive team. It was also a fitting moment to recognise the huge contribution that our chair for the past 7 years, Alan Leighton, pictured here in his last public event at the Trust before he stepped down last month. Alan has brought his vast business experience to the Trust, setting an ambitious vision, providing the drive and energy to move us forward, recognising in particular the important role that our waterways play in communities across the country, providing a natural health service, free and available to all. Fellow trustee Ben Gordon also stepped down from the board last month, and I also want to acknowledge the huge contribution that Ben has made. Thank you to both of them. Now let's take stock of what has been achieved in the Trust's first 10 years. And I'm going to go through some bullets one at a time on this next slide. Firstly, we're seeing usage rising. In the last year, we've seen nearly 800 million individual visits to our waterways, around 10 million regular visitors, record numbers. We saw huge increases in towpath use in some urban areas at the height of the COVID pandemic, and much of that has continued, with numbers also returning in the more rural locations that people can visit again. In the 10 years, we've also seen boat numbers rising, up around 10% since 2012. And of course, more use of the water for paddleboarding, canoeing, and other uses. On to the next bullet, volunteer growth. Over the past 10 years in aggregate, we've seen 5 million hours of volunteer time given. And after a small reduction during the years of the pandemic, we're seeing rising numbers of volunteers again. And over 250 partner groups of various shapes and sizes working with us. For the next bullet, we see strong investment performance in the 10 years since the Trust was launched. The endowment we were given in 2012 has grown strongly, exceeding market benchmarks, and now valued at over £1 billion, providing a vital annual return for the Trust and the long-term value that we need for our sustainable future. The next bullet shows that our overall asset condition shows sustained gradual improvement since 2012, with the percentage of assets in the poorest condition categories gradually declining over time. We've also seen improvements in our care of the heritage that we're responsible for, with only one listed structure remaining on the National Heritage at Risk Register. We've also seen wide environmental improvements, everything from our volunteer-based Wild in Birmingham community orchard to larger scale nature recovery programs. And we've now seen over 500 miles of Green Flag Awards, which I know Julie will talk about later. Moving to the next bullet, we've seen the charity model established, with the Trust drawing on charitable donations from across the spectrum, with around 20 million of individual charitable donations given over the first 10 years, and other long-term partners, such as the People's Postcode Lottery, secured. We also have 1.3 million supporters connecting with us across all of our digital channels, and that's rising every month. Finally, we've got widespread and growing community engagement at the ground level across the country, delivering health and wellbeing benefits that, as Heather will explain later, are valued at over £4 billion annually. And we're developing our role in partnership with Sport England and local health providers to tackle health inequalities and to support green social prescribing opportunities. I could go on, but instead we've put together a short film to share some more of our achievements in our first 10 years. And before I invite the film to play, let me emphasize that whilst we're proud of our progress, we don't for a moment believe we've come close yet to fulfilling our potential in every aspect of our work. We know there are many areas for improvement and further opportunity, where we have more to do to realise our vision for living waterways that transform places and enrich lives. We face many challenges, as you will hear from my colleagues shortly, and cannot be complacent. And now, let's roll the film. By coincidence, we were able to share our 10-year anniversary this summer with some other significant national events. If we move to the next slide, you'll see the prominent role we played in the Queen's Baton Relay events, with our waterways featuring in a central role at 12 locations through July, reflecting how central our waterways are to so many places across the country. And with the death of Her Majesty the late Queen, there is added poignancy to these events that celebrated her 70-year reign. The Baton Relay culminated in Birmingham for the Commonwealth Games, in which we again played a central role. We move to the next slide. Right from the opening ceremony, in which the city's canals were the centrepiece of the set design, through the 2 weeks of events which saw our canals provide the backdrop for many of the numerous media broadcasts. We saw large increases in visitors to our canals and introduced ourselves to a global audience. We move to the next slide. One other feature of our 10-year anniversary, as described in our grant agreement with government from 2012, was to have been the conclusion of a review of our future grant beyond March 2027. Our current grant agreement runs for another 4.5 years, but as we're making long-term decisions regarding the care of our historic network, it had been intended to provide the Trust with some clarity on our future funding well in advance. Whilst there has been much work undertaken on the grant review with DEFRA, it was announced in the spring, and as you can see the text on the screen, that the review timescale would need to be extended, with the outcome published in the autumn. Since then, as you know, we have a new government, with a new Secretary of State at DEFRA and a new ministerial team. We're therefore starting discussions with DEFRA about the likely timescale for the review now, and hope that further information will be available in the near future. Of course, with our grant no longer benefiting from any inflationary increase, it is vital that we continue to make the strongest possible case for future funding of the Trust's waterways, given the very substantial public benefits they deliver and all of the risks that we manage. So if we move to the next slide, it's more important than ever that we continue to build support from across all the users and beneficiaries and supporters of the canals and river navigations in our care. In particular, we recognise how important it is that we connect with our boating customers, who are most keenly involved very often with the waterways and for whom the waterways, of course, were first built. We are launching our BOTA report, if we move to the next slide, in the next few days, which brings together some of the key aspects of our work to ensure that our waterways are maintained for the benefit of boaters. You'll be hearing more about that from colleagues shortly, but when we launch the report, you'll have a chance to see how our support for boaters is being delivered. Now, David, I'll hand back to you to go on to hear from other colleagues. Thank you.
Well, many thanks, Richard. For me, coming in you, that kind of rapid trot through history and the things that the Trust has already achieved is very important. I think it would be fair to say that in its short 10-year lifespan so far, the Canal and River Trust has made a real and significant difference, but we are still very aware of how much more we have to do and how much more benefit we can deliver from our network. We're going to look now at some of the challenges that we have today and some of the possibilities and opportunities for the future. And the next presentation is going to come from Steve Dainty, who is our Chief Financial Officer.
Hello, I'm Steve Dainty and I'm the Finance Director of Canal and River Trust. Today I'm going to give you a finance update focusing on the results for the year ended 31 March 2022. I'll also comment on the broader macroeconomic challenges and their impact on the Trust. First, a summary. Income was in line with the prior year, but represented an underlying increase which I'll talk about later. Expenditure on raising funds, that's the expenditure we incur to generate income, was up 4 million, and this reflected the post-COVID return to normal. Charitable expenditure, meanwhile, at the headline level was slightly lower, although underlying expenditure was significantly higher as we began to spend against provisions made in prior years for infrastructure works. Overall, our deficit was very close to where we planned it at £7 million. Further down the income statement, investment valuation gains were 84 million. That's 8%, and a gain from the valuation of our pension scheme was also 84 million pounds. Let me put those two numbers into a bit more context. On investments, with the impact of COVID, gains in the previous 2 years were significantly lower than we would expect. So to a large extent, gains this year represent catch-up. In addition, you'll note that nearly a quarter of our income is represented by returns from our investment portfolio. In an environment of increased inflation on our costs, investment growth is essential to maintain the real value of that investment income. Moving on to pensions. As I've said in these presentations in previous years, the movement on our pension valuation in our annual report is driven by a very prescriptive set of accounting rules. The gains this year follow a smaller loss in the previous year. Increases in future interest rate expectations, which are used to discount liabilities, together with asset gains, have driven the movement this year. These gains don't create any additional cash or resources for us to spend elsewhere. The triennial actuarial valuation, which is more important, is carried out every 3 years. That valuation is just starting now and is due to report back to the scheme in mid-2023. Early indications are we'll be somewhere close to the last valuation in 2019 with a very small deficit and no change to our £5 million per year deficit funding. Finally, our cash balance at year end was £30 million, which was down a little on prior year. Looking into a little more detail at our income, this is what we call our wagon wheel and shows the main constituents of our income. These are from our finance review, which forms part of our annual report. The first thing to note is the diversity of our sources of income. This is a continued strength for the Trust, and particularly during COVID, when many charities found income sources like donations became increasingly difficult to sustain. I wanted to pick out just a few of the key points. Firstly, DEFRA funding, which comprises around a quarter of our income, is now fixed until 2027. This represents a significant challenge for the Trust with inflation at higher levels. Our estimate, based on current inflation forecasts, is that the real value of this income will be eroded by around a quarter by 2027. Secondly, and as I've already touched on, our more commercial income sources, that's investment income, licences and utility income, all saw good growth on prior year, with the biggest contributor being the non-repeat of COVID support during the prior year. Taking these commercial sources together, they've grown around 5.5% over the past 2 years combined, just ahead of inflation. That comparison is important because it compares to the period immediately prior to COVID. Elsewhere, we saw our income from donations reduce as a result in a change in arrangements with the People's Postcode Lottery, and also income from the furlough scheme finished during the prior year and so impacts our year-on-year comparisons. Finally, third-party income was lower as a large project, the construction of fish passes on the River Severn, came to an end. Turning now to charitable expenditure. Whilst at the headline level, expenditure has fallen slightly compared to the prior year, you'll note that the Trust was able to spend more on its charitable activities than ever before. This is because, as well as the 180 million indicated on the slide, the Trust also spent an additional 12 million on major infrastructure works which were provided for in prior years as our asset improvement programme gathered pace. This programme is expected to continue for around 5 years and is expected to cost a total of around £200 million in addition to our typical spend. The programme is broadly on track, notwithstanding the impact of inflation on future projects. The programme cost and timing is still subject to some changes as we see the impact of the inflation unfold and get to the detailed project planning at each site. Elsewhere, we saw increased spend on day-to-day operations and caring for our waterways as the organisation recovered to more normal activities following COVID. We also continued to invest in dredging and vegetation management, and it's notable that spending on these two tasks alone consumed 2/3 of our entire boat licence income. Bringing this all together then in our income statement, you can see our income, fundraising costs and charitable expenditure leading to the 7.2 million deficit, and then the balance sheet movements I explained earlier leading to a total movement in funds of £160.6 million. So looking ahead, and as they say, the only certainty is that nothing is certain, and this has never been more true. If we look back at the past 3 years, we've had global pandemic, war in Europe and supply chain shortages and higher inflation as a consequence. It's true to say financial markets have been significantly disrupted by what's happened. In particular, in the first quarter of the current financial year, we've seen equity markets fall, and in the past few weeks following the government's fiscal event, we've also, over the past year, seen inflation expectations increase, and then increase again. And this is really new territory for the Trust. Since the Trust was formed in 2012 and up to its peak in summer 2021, the FTSE has more than doubled, and CPI inflation has not at any point until recently been above 2.7%. That has changed significantly in recent months. So why does this matter? Well, first of all, as investment values fall relative to inflation, so does the spending power of our investment income. That means we have less income to spend on our charitable activities. Secondly, our income is a lot less sensitive to inflation than our costs, our fixed DEFRA grant, for example. Meanwhile, with infrastructure costs a significant part of our cost base and costs in the construction industry rising by even more than general inflation, this creates a challenge for our charity. So pulling all of that together, what does that mean? Well, it's been a year of continued progress. We've grown underlying income and the charitable expenditure we're making to improve our network more than it's ever been. Our balance sheet is strong, but is restricted to a large extent. Looking ahead, we have work to do. Our income is challenged by unprecedented investment markets, and costs are challenged from higher inflation than we've ever known as a trust. We also have an uncertain grant determination beyond 2027, with a real risk of further reductions at that point. But we've already started to critically look at our income and our cost base and the way we operate. We need to continue to do the things we're doing whilst ensuring we're achieving long-term financial stability. That is, our underlying cost base is supported by our income for the long term. That will mean some tough choices, and our work on this has already started. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. So with that description of our current financial position, some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that we have, we're now going to hear from a number of colleagues about how that then affects the work that we are planning to do and what we want to do into the future. And the first presentation is going to be from Malcolm Horne, who's our Chief Infrastructure Programmes Officer.
Hi, I'm Malcolm, and I joined the Trust in March 2022 as Chief Infrastructure and Programmes Officer. I'm a chartered civil engineer, and I love that my team here at the Trust is both highly practical, all about delivery, getting things fixed and improved, and strong and technical expertise, working out what needs doing and how best to do it. Two things that I personally value a lot. Another thing I care deeply about is making sure that we operate sustainably. And this is something I'm expecting we will focus on more and more at the Trust, whether environmental improvements, reducing our carbon impact, or consuming less of the world's finite resources. We continue to focus most of our funding and resources on the Trust's core purpose of caring for the waterways, keeping them safe, attractive and accessible. And we've again been able to increase the amount we spend on core maintenance and repair works that keep the canals navigable for boaters and accessible for a wonderfully diverse range of users. Last winter, we spent almost 43 million on winter maintenance and repairs. We carried out over 160 projects across our waterway network, replacing lock gates, repairing masonry and brickwork, fixing leaks, updating and installing hydraulics and electrics at mechanised structures. Our specialist workshops handcrafted 132 lock leaves, which were installed at 73 locks across the network. Collectively, this investment helped us to meet and slightly exceed our DEFRA waterway targets for the condition of our towpaths, principal assets and flood management assets. Right now, we are gearing up for this year's stoppage season with a similar level of works planned. Our high-risk reservoirs, the oldest in the country, continue to be the largest spend item in our programme. The reconstruction of the spillway at Toddbrook Reservoir achieved a key milestone with the granting of planning consent after months of careful engagement with the numerous local stakeholders, and works have commenced this summer. This major £30 million project will involve building a new overflow structure to the north of the dam and is set to complete in 2024. We delivered many other significant reservoir projects this year, and with many more either on site now or in the planning process, as we invest tens of millions of pounds of additional works over this decade. We completed over 1.6 million of improvements to our 200-year-old reservoirs at Earlswood, which feed the Stratford Canal in Solihull. And this included raising and strengthening the core of the main dam to improve its resilience during flood events, and desilting and erosion protection works to the canal feeder channel, and upgrading some of the footpaths around the popular site. At Carmill Reservoir near St Helens, we successfully used a new underwater robot to carry out maintenance and repairs within inaccessible confined spaces, averting the need to drain the reservoir. We began a 2-year maintenance and repair project at Slowett Reservoir in Huddersfield, which supplies water to the Huddersfield Narrow Canal. At Brent Reservoir in London, we upgraded the electrical sluices, and we carried out repairs to the spillway at Tringford Reservoir, serving the Grand Union Canal in Hertfordshire. At Barrowford Reservoir on the Leeds and Liverpool Canal in the northwest, we lowered the water levels to address leakage issues and commenced work to lower the dam height and install improved drainage. And we completed the installation of a new drawdown siphon at Bosley Reservoir near Macclesfield, and works at Nipton Reservoir to feed the Grantham Canal in Lincolnshire. At the beginning of March, Storm Eustace swept across the UK, causing widespread flooding across the network and some structural damage to buildings and winter works construction sites. From West India Docks in London to a major breach on a section of the Leeds and Liverpool Canal at Rishton in Lancashire, we felt the impacts of climate change and spent millions repairing the damage. We must continue to focus funding and resources on increasing the resilience of the canal network. In doing so, we can also help Britain mitigate the effects of a changing climate, using the canals to cool cities in summer and provide low-carbon energy to heat homes in the winter, and also as sustainable transport traffic-free routes through our towns and cities. Our heritage work is highly specialist, fascinating and valued by many who enjoy the canals. We were awarded a £1.4 million grant from Historic England's Heritage Stimulus Fund, which supported 7 major projects on the Walsall, Leeds and Liverpool, Peak Forest, Grand Union and Ashton canals. And these included repairs to Grade 2 listed Northwich Town Bridge, Britain's first electrically operated floating swing bridge, and working with specialist abseiling teams and stone masonry conservators to repair the Grade 1 listed Dundas Aqueduct. I recently had the pleasure of visiting our underwater fish viewing gallery at Diglis Island on the River Severn in Worcester, which opened this year. It's an amazing space, allowing the public a close-up view of one of 4 new fish passes installed as part of the 20 million Unlocking the Severn project. And it's opened up 250 kilometres of Britain's longest river for the first time in nearly 180 years. The 100-metre long fish pass took 2 years to build and is the biggest deep vertical slot fish pass in England and Wales. It's already surpassing the expectations of the ecologists, with 25 species using the fish passes since they opened. A great example of partnership delivery. So it's an exciting time for our engineering teams at the Trust, with a huge step up in the investment programme from what it was a couple of years ago. We've strengthened our end-to-end programme management teams and awarded new construction contracts to a greater diversity of regional delivery partners. Together, we have a real opportunity to leave a fantastic legacy of a canal and river network renewed for future generations, safer to operate and more reliable. But it's also a big responsibility to invest all this money wisely. So I look forward to everyone in the Trust playing their part in prioritising what we spend it on, and us all delivering it as efficiently and sustainably as we can.
Many thanks also to Malcolm. I think as a Trust we are very clear about the challenges that climate change brings, but also what we can contribute to be able to alleviate some of the impacts of that, and to think as much as we can about the sustainability of what we do and how that can help to ensure that we are as environmental as we possibly can be. We're now going to hear from Julie Sharman. Julie is our Chief Operating Officer, and she's going to be talking about some of the people who are involved in our work.
Hello, I'm Julie. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Trust. Everything we do in the Trust is built on the foundation of having a navigable network of canals and rivers, so our ongoing investment in our infrastructure is essential for that, and to our customers and visitors. Looking after an ageing network will always be a challenge for which we need to secure more public support.
In operations, our primary role is to ensure our canals and rivers are safe and available for our boating customers and other waterway users. Our operations teams are there for our customers, providing support and assisting with the operation of locks and bridges. We are always available to step in and help our boaters if things go wrong. As well as the day-to-day maintenance and repairs, we also manage water control, which has been a particular challenge this year because of the drought. The majority of our time and effort in operations goes towards caring for our waterways and delivering great service. But as well as this, we understand the value of our waterways to the communities through which they run.
Last year, we emerged from the pandemic to a new normal. We saw how communities continued to value their waterways, making regular use of their towpaths and getting the health benefits that we have shown they deliver. Our focus has been to strengthen the link between our canals and rivers and their local communities, because in many urban areas, those communities are the ones who will benefit the most. Our research tells us that people value locations which are safe and attractive places to visit. So, to connect with our local communities, we have continued our partnership with Keep Britain Tidy, securing a further 40 miles of green flag waterways. This year we have focused on urban waterways, gaining external endorsement of the environmental quality of our canals in Coventry, Manchester and Stoke-on-Trent, adding these and more to secure 446 miles of our network awarded Green Flag status. Green Flag Green Heritage Site accreditation was also awarded to Foxton Locks, the Weaver Navigation and parts of the Shropshire Union Canals in Cheshire. We were particularly proud to secure the first ever Blue Flag Marinas Award for our Royal Albert Dock and Salthouse Dock in Liverpool, in recognition of their outstanding water quality and safety. Across all regions, we have targeted significant engagement activities through our People Postcode Lottery-funded Community Routes programme, engaging local people in volunteering and activities on and around their canal or river. Our strategic focus areas for this programme are Sefton, Burnley and Sheffield in the north, Coventry, Walsall and Leicester in the Midlands, Torfaen in Wales, Tottenham Hale and Brent in London. Our work aims to make life better by water for those local communities by engaging people in our volunteering and participation programmes. These are focused around our Let's activities, which range from walking, cycling, paddleboarding and canoeing, to Let's Yoga and Paint. These are available to everyone. As we continue to build a sense of ownership in our communities, we completed our 3-year street art project, testing a new approach on engagement and working with local communities and artists. 5 new murals were installed in our strategic focus areas of Sheffield, Walsall, Sefton and Brent. This work was also funded by the players of the People's Postcode Lottery. Following the success of these projects, we launched new street art trails in Sheffield and Leicester, aiming to decrease graffiti and antisocial behaviour and to change negative perceptions of our waterways to pleasant and safe places to visit. Our Let's Fish programme has been hugely successful in encouraging young people to try fishing, as well as giving adults the opportunity to try it too. Fishing is a sport which has the largest number of participants in the UK, and our canals and rivers provide enough opportunity for people to discover the well-being benefits of being by the waterways. Our Let's Fish events are inclusive and aim to diversify the sport to reach a younger, wider and larger population. Over 200 young people joined the National Celebration of Fishing held on the Shropshire Union Canal last September. Our research evaluating the well-being effects of Let's Fish found a statistically significant positive well-being effect for children and young people. We know that arts and culture play an important role in connecting people to our waterways. This year we renewed our partnership with the Arts Council England and contributed to the Coventry UK City of Culture 2021, with a canal basin hosting a range of different performances and installations. The latest phase of the ongoing major Arts Council-funded Super Slowway along the Leeds and Liverpool Canal in Pennine, Lancashire, continues to go from strength to strength as we develop the concept of a linear canal park from Blackburn to Pendle, with key stakeholders in the region. Our support for canal restoration continued with a second reconstructed lock on the Grantham Canal opened in August 2021, thanks to the dedicated volunteers of the Canal Society and the support of the National Lottery Heritage Fund. We were thrilled when Powys County Council secured over £15 million from the government's Levelling Up funding for the further restoration of the Montgomery Canal in February last year, and with the progress made by the Cotswold Canal Partnership during the year. Our open day events give visitors the chance to see waterway walls and other historic structures normally hidden from view. It also gives members of the public the chance to speak to our skilled teams and find out more about the work we do to maintain this historic network. We invited the public to come and see our hidden heritage last winter, where we undertook repairs at Newark Town Lock, on the Hertford Union Canal, at Blackpit Lock on the Rochdale Canal, Anderton Boatlift, Grinley Brook, and to make our experiences accessible to all, we filmed several virtual open days across the network. We are proud of the work of all our colleagues and volunteers across the Trust, whether they are at the forefront of providing excellent customer service, day-to-day operations and maintenance, or in a support role. Last year, we were delighted to see our volunteers return to support us in force. Their passion and commitment to our waterways and helping the Trust provide a high-quality visitor experience is second to none. Our volunteers support in many ways, as volunteer lockkeepers, education explorers, at welcome stations and alongside our maintenance and delivery teams. Last year, delivering around 630,000 hours of support.
So thank you to Julie for that. And I'm sure many of the people watching this public meeting today are volunteers of the Canal and River Trust, and to all of you, a huge thanks. And if you're interested in becoming a volunteer, just you get in touch with us and we will ensure that you're going to be able to find a useful volunteer job that will really add value to the work that we do. We will shortly be arriving at the Q&A session, and I hope that you've been putting in questions that I will be able to put to Richard and that we will do our best to answer. But before we go to the Q&A session, the last of our colleagues that I'm going to introduce is Heather Clark, who's our Strategy, Impact and Engagement Director. Heather's going to talk about a number of things, but we have an important new report coming out next month, which I think is going to be mainly the subject of her presentation. So over to you, Heather.
Hello, everyone. I'm Heather Clark, the Strategy, Engagement and Impact Director at the Canal and River Trust. And I will be presenting a short update on the work that we've been doing to understand the social value and the economic impact of our waterways, by calculating the aggregate benefits delivered by our waterways to society and the economy, which we will be publishing later this month. Waterways as blue spaces and blue infrastructure have an important role to play in helping to address the challenges faced by this country, arising from the national crisis on health, biodiversity and climate change, as well as responding to the urban green space deficit, and in providing access to nature on the doorstep to many urban communities. The aim of this study is to set out our approach that we've adopted in measuring and monitorising the total social value and economic impact of our waterways being delivered annually. These values will provide an important basis for tracking the difference that our activities and interventions are making upon the well-being of people, places and the economy. However, there are some well-being benefits that we're not able to be valued fully or at all in monetary terms, but it's still important that we capture and evaluate these benefits as they help us tell our story. We have been and are working with partners from across academia, as well as with economists, behavioural scientists, social research specialists, on a wide range of insight, research, evaluation, valuation activities, and aligning all of our work with Treasury Green Book and research sector best practice. All this work has been used as the baseline for this aggregation study. The Trust delivers a wide range of public benefits, which we can measure and value. We've adopted a theory of change approach, as advocated in the Treasury Magenta book, Guidance, to explain how our different assets, activities and interventions lead to the delivery of benefits, and then can be measured and or monetised. There are three parts to our approach, which I will now briefly explain in turn. The first part is around inputs. The delivery of a wide range of wellbeing benefits is dependent upon the waterways infrastructure being safe and resilient, and the waterways and towpaths being available to use and inviting and safe places to visit. The second part is around outputs and outcomes. We delivered our outcomes measurement framework in conjunction with Cardiff University, which we published in 2017. This suite of output and outcome indicators were adapted further in 2020 in response to wider policy ambitions, societal challenges and movements, to fully reflect the breadth of contribution that waterways are making in improving the well-being of people, communities, the economy, nature and the planet. In terms of monetising impact, using the Treasury Green Book guidance, we have grouped benefits delivered under 4 pillars. The first is monetising the social value delivered from the annual welfare benefits generated by the waterways and the Trust's activities. The second pillar is monetising the economic value of the contribution that waterways make to the economy each year. The third pillar is asset protection value, created through asset resilience and amenity protected and enhanced by the Trust. And the fourth pillar captures all those benefits that can't be monetised but are still very important to capture, such as the quantitative and qualitative benefits delivered by the waterways and the Trust, as they still have very important societal value. We have worked with Symmetrica Jacobs to develop our value framework, which defines appropriate valuation techniques that are fully aligned with the Treasury Green Book. We are delivering a wide range of welfare benefits each year, which include physical exercise, cultural heritage, active travel, volunteering, and renewable energy, to name a few. These benefits are attributable to the individuals or households, businesses, as well as government, such as through cost savings to the NHS each year derived from active use of our waterways. There are some activities which we are delivering multiple benefits, such as recreational usage, active travel, access to nature. So where these benefits values overlap, it is important that we ensure that we avoid double counting. Our waterways make an important contribution to the UK as well as to the regional and local economies through the expenditure of boating and water sport participants on activities, the economic impacts associated with businesses that depend directly or indirectly on the waterways for their revenue streams, the value of reducing road haulage miles through increased transport of waterborne freight, as well as waterways being corridors for growth, housing, regeneration and investment. To understand our contribution to the economy, we jointly commissioned a study with British Marine to establish the economic value of the inland marine economy. So from all our work, we've been able to evidence that the annual social value being generated by waterways and our activities is £4.6 billion, including £1.1 billion cost savings to the NHS through active visits and use. In terms of annual economic value, boating and wider water-based tourism expenditure, it generates over 1.5 billion worth of gross value added, with more than 80,000 jobs being directly or indirectly dependent upon our waterways, supporting the visitor economy and the marine sector. In addition to the benefits being delivered by the availability of our network, managing and maintaining the waterway infrastructure has an asset protection value. The Trust operates an interconnected and interdependent system with open access, which is over 200 years old, including over 10,000 national infrastructure assets and the oldest reservoirs in the country. The reservoir dams and canal embankments maintained by the Trust protect many households, properties, businesses, telecommunications and utilities, as well as other forms of national infrastructure, such as electricity, substations, schools and transport benefits. We cannot put a monetary value on some of the benefits delivered by the waterways and our activities by the Trust, in partnership or by others that are using our waterways as a platform for community outreach. But we are continuing to build our repository of case studies and testimonies so that we can demonstrate the full breadth of our benefits being delivered and the richness added to people's lives by our waterways. I hope that the presentation has given you an overview of our approach to monetrising the benefits being delivered by the nation's waterways in our care, and how to demonstrate the increasing value that waterways play in society today and can play in the future. We will be shortly publishing our Valuing Our Waterways report, and it will be available to download from our website later this month. Thank you for listening.
So once again, thank you to Heather. I think all of us feel that the canal network provides huge benefit to the community. And I think that having that report, I think, demonstrates beyond argument that our network really does make a profound impact on many, many people's lives. And not just in terms of well-being, but in terms of a very significant economic impact. And we are determined to ensure that we continue to build on that. Okay, so thank you to all of our colleagues for these really, I think, insightful and informative presentations. We do have a number of questions, and I'm sure Richard will be able to answer every single one of them completely. And the first of them, actually, we've got a couple of questions on the government grant. And the first question comes from Les Etheridge, who's the National Chair of the Inland Waterways Association. And it's a fairly straightforward question. What would be the consequence for the waterways if the Trust's grant funding were to be reduced?
Thank you, David, and thank you, Les, for the question. The short answer is that there could be a very significant and serious effect on the waterways. But just to put a bit of context to that, we receive around 52 million in grant from government. That's around a quarter of our income, as you will have heard Steve say in his finance presentation earlier. That has reduced somewhat as a proportion from something like 37–38% prior to the creation of the Trust. And with that figure fixed now until 2027, as our other income streams are expected to grow, that figure would reduce to something close to 20% of our total income. But nevertheless, 50 million is a sizable amount of money. And if that were to reduce at a time when the cost of maintaining, repairing, caring for the waterways is rising, particularly as we see greater impact from more extreme weather events and climate change, as Malcolm described in his presentation. So we have to do our best, both to grow the income streams that we are directly in control of, those investments, the commercial income, the charitable income, and so on, but also to make our case very strongly about the profound potential consequences of that grant being reduced. We know, as Heather described, that there are very substantial benefits being delivered that are derived from the waterways being attractive, available places for people to enjoy. A reduction in spending, especially in grant funding, could mean that there would be a gradual deterioration. And that could mean that the quality of the waterways, the experience of using them, will itself decline. And of course, that will put us in a position where the long-term future of the waterways could actually be at risk. And so it is vital that we take the opportunity afforded by the review to make the case for ongoing sustained funding.
Okay, thank you for that, Richard. We've had a broadly similar question, but with a specific issue in it from the National Association of Boat Owners on the navigational impact. I mean, I think you've already talked about the wide range of possible impacts, but do you want to say anything specifically about that?
Well, just again to echo some of what Malcolm said, and indeed in Julie's opening remarks, so much of what we do is about navigation. You know, the bulk of the money that we spend on the waterways is about securing the navigation, so the locks operate, so the channel is dredged, so that all the other assets form to enable boats to travel around and boaters to enjoy the network. And we're very firmly committed to that being at the very centre of our future plans. But of course, if our resources are stretched, then inevitably there would be an impact on navigation from that, simply because so much of our income is devoted to that. So it is going to be the case that unless we're able to secure income, both from government and from elsewhere, from our charitable funding, from our commercial activities, that is insufficient over the long term to fund all the work we need to do, then there will potentially be an impact on navigation. We will strive, of course, to ensure that doesn't happen, but we need the resources to be able to safeguard the long-term future for everyone, including for navigation.
Yeah. So for my own part, I think that implicit in the foundation documents of the Canal and River Trust is an understanding that we would take on the various obligations that we have discussed and the assets, and government would make obviously a significant contribution up front, but that there would be a continuing expectation that government would have a role to play in helping us to protect and preserve some very old and important heritage assets, as well as the modern network that the canals and waterways now are. And that's certainly the kind of conversation that I hope we will be having with ministers and senior officials over the next few months as we explore what that relationship, that financial relationship, might look like into the future. I want to go on to a question that's come from Sue O'Hare, who is chair of the Navigation Committee of the Inland Waterways Association. And she asks, members are keen to see vibrant, well-maintained waterways. What steps are the Trust taking to improve the condition of the waterways? I have to say that for me, quite a lot of the presentations that we've already had have demonstrated the amount of work that we are doing trying to preserve and protect and improve the condition of the waterways. But Richard, you might want to add to that.
Thank you, James. I'll try to be brief given what we've heard. But it is important, and this perhaps answers the previous question as well, that it isn't, of course, just about investing in the condition for navigation. All of the risks that we manage also depend upon having waterways in safe condition for the communities that live around them, as well as those who use them. And of course, our core purpose is to maintain the waterways, to ensure that they are available for people to enjoy. So much of our spending goes on that already, and we will continue to prioritise as carefully as we can so that the investment we make reaches the people, reaches the parts of the network that most need it. Now, that's an ongoing challenge for our engineering teams, as Malcolm described, to make those choices when funding is restricted, when we don't have all the funds that we would want. But all the funding is geared towards ensuring that the maximum benefit can be gained from people using the waterways. And that depends upon having the waterways in the best possible condition. Really, that sequence, that connection that Heather described, the foundation for all that we do is to have safe, well-maintained infrastructure. That enables navigation. It enables everyone else to enjoy it. It enables the communities alongside them to be kept safe as well. So it's our first and foremost commitment is to make that investment with the resources that we have to keep the waterways in the best possible condition that we can.
Okay, thanks, Richard. I have an interestingly worded question here, which has come from the Calder Navigation Society. And the question is, why are you spending valuable time and resources on engaging with diverse communities and issues? Your priority should be focused on the waterways. Now, I'm going to come back to Richard on this in a moment, but a couple of things very quickly from me. The first is, from a board point of view, I am clear that our job is fundamentally to protect the mission of the Canal and River Trust. And that mission is at its heart about protecting and preserving our waterways so that they're navigable, and our towpaths so that they're able to be used by members of the community for a wide range of activities. But there is something more than this, isn't there? I think everyone who's involved in this conversation today, we are all people who care about and love and feel that we've gained benefit from our canal network and the towpaths that go alongside them. And I think our ambition properly is to ensure that as many people as possible can also benefit from that. And, you know, when we have something as precious and important as the network that we are custodians of, I think we all want to ensure that as many people as possible can derive benefit and enjoyment from that. But Richard, you wish to say a bit more about this.
I can only echo those words, David. And I suppose just one observation is I don't think the two things are in conflict. Indeed, we believe that it's important that we secure a broad base of support and engagement with the waterways to secure their future, so that the waterways future actually depends upon spending some time encouraging the communities alongside us to feel that they have a stake in them. You know, it's our long-term future that will depend upon that. So, you know, we shouldn't see the waterways as some sort of, you know, minority interest that only a few people can enjoy, because that way their future will not be assured. By making it part of the lives of millions of people, building that broad base of support through the involvement of all the diverse communities that we have alongside our canals that can enjoy them, different parts of the country that we run through, we can then ensure there's a big, broad base of support that will ensure they are prioritised for the future.
Yes, so I strongly agree with that. And I also think it's just worth pointing out that in one of the presentations earlier, we talked about 5 million hours of volunteer effort helping to support the work and helping to support the network. I think that there is significant opportunity to get more people involved in doing that, to have more volunteers, and from a wider group of communities who will not just be in some way a drag on the resources, but will make active contributions to help us to support and preserve our waterways and ensure that they're fit not just for present, but also for future purpose. And I mean, as a complete newcomer to the board and to the Canal and River Trust, one of the things that keeps on coming back to me in the way I think about this is that we are looking after assets that are 250 years old in some cases. What a fantastic thing was done all that time ago. And my ambition for the Trust is not just to be able to preserve those assets for next year or for the next 5 years or for the next 10 years, but for the next 250 years. And I think we have to be putting in place strategies that help to ensure that as an organization, we have the stability and the future financial strength to be able to do that, and ensure that our message to the country is that this is a resource for all of us that we want to be able to protect, so that people generations from now will also be able to have enjoyment from it. And I think this is a pretty significant challenge for us, but is an integral part of the story that we're developing and that we want to ensure other people are picking up on. I've got. Sorry,
one little postscript to that. It also enables us to tap into new sources of income. I talked earlier about the support from Sport England, from health providers. By reaching communities around us, we will actually draw more resources to help us care for the waterway. So there's actually a short-term benefit as well as the long-term benefit that I described.
Great, thank you, Richard. So we've got a question now, which is, you know, kind of picking up from some of the challenging weather conditions that we've had this year, and the fact that we have ongoing drought conditions. And this is from Sandra Walsh, and it is: when will Moseley and Marple locks be opened, even on a temporary basis, to allow the boats which are stranded through? Many need to return to their winter moorings, and it would only need to be opened briefly to allow that to happen, and could then be locked up again. And we've had a similar question about reopening the Huddersfield Narrow Canal. But there is a kind of deeper issue here, isn't there, about how we ensure that there is enough water in our canals, especially in drought conditions.
Yes, it's been a very frustrating summer, David, for so many voters, particularly on our canals in the north. And we're working very hard all the time to ensure that we manage the water resources we have as efficiently as possible, to keep canals open for as long as possible, to limit the restrictions. It has, sadly, because of the extent of the shortage of supply we faced, to close some canals. We have announced today, or will be announcing later today, the short opening, just as Sandra requested, on some of those canals to enable boats that do need to move back into sections that have been restricted to get back to moorings ahead of the winter. So as far as possible, across the canals affected, we will be making that announcement. Please look at the details of the canals, because the circumstances on each are different, and it means that I can't give a sort of a general answer about them all. In some cases, we do also have the early start of some winter works to take into account, and that may also restrict our ability to open canals now as we head towards the winter, with such an extensive programme of winter works being undertaken. But certainly most of the canals that have suffered from closures for the past few months, there will be a window of opportunity. It might even be a week or 2 weeks, where possible, for boats to move back to get to home.
Okay, thanks for that, Richard. And good to know that even if it's just for a short time, that window of opportunity is being created. I'm now going to ask what I think will be the last question in this Q&A session. And it comes from Ivor Kaplan from the Bradley Canal Restoration Society. What is the current appetite of the Trust for taking on newly restored canals, and how do you see this changing in the future? Richard?
Thanks, David, and hello to Ivor. We work very closely with so many of the societies that are promoting and working so hard on restoring canals. As many people know, we have a very direct stake in some, like the Montgomery Canal, for which there's been a large grant awarded through the government's Levelling Up Fund, the Grantham Canal that we also own of. Others, we play a more supportive role, and of course, as canal restorations are moving forward, we want to work to ensure that where they're being integrated with the navigable canal system, that is done on a sustainable basis. So we continue to engage constructively, but perhaps a little guardedly, because we're very conscious that with so many responsibilities, so many obligations with the network that we have today, we can only take on more responsibilities where there is a case for doing so, where there is sufficient funding, where the asset condition would meet the kind of standard that we would need to set. So we want to encourage restoration, help all the restoration schemes to move forward, to flourish, to achieve their goals as a partner with them. But we do want to make sure that before anything is taken into the Trust, that it would meet those important criteria. So we weren't in any way diminishing the ability of the Trust to care for the current navigable network that we're responsible for.
Okay, Richard, thank you for that. And you know, looking after what we've already got is clearly going to be at the heart of what we do. I have had actually just 2 or 3 new questions that have arrived, and I think we've probably got time to deal with them. Maybe not all of them, we'll see. So reservoirs and this general question about drought. I think this is the National Association of Boat Owners asking that, you know, they understand the lack of rain has been a contributor to the major disruption of some waterways. Is the lack of reservoir holding capacity due to lack of maintenance and historical negligence? And what steps are you taking to ensure that the reservoirs are brought back to full capacity, plus all canal leakages identified, with the correct remedial action taken? How are we improving our resilience?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question, David. I mean, clearly our water supplies are vital. We talked in the question from Sandra about the immediate issues. Of course, we are concerned about the medium term as well. Already looking about our water supply resilience for 2023. Many people know some work that we've also been through a process of having to license all our water abstractions over the past few years to bring ourselves into the kind of the water framework regulations, which previously, because we've been such an historic abstractor of water, we sat outside. So there's been a lot going on in terms of our water supply. On top of that, of course, we have been investing very significantly in our reservoirs over the past few years. And that doesn't reflect a lack of maintenance in the past, rather it reflects a fresh look at the scale of the risks that our reservoirs represent, and the importance working very closely with the very strict reservoir legislation and the guidance from the Environment Agency to minimise and mitigate the risk that any of our very old reservoirs, the oldest in the country, have, even very, very marginally, need to be addressed. So that is where a very substantial amount of our spending is going, as Malcolm described in his earlier presentation. So that will have a short-term impact in reducing availability of water supply in some places, because very often it is necessary to draw down reservoirs as work is being undertaken, and then there's the time to refill them, and that often means that their full capacity isn't available in the short term. But the positive thing about the investment we're making now is that will mean that we are in a position where our reservoirs should be capable then of providing their full capacity in the longer term as the work to reduce the risks, to improve reservoir safety is delivered. So we understand that our water supplies are not as resilient as any of us would like. We certainly don't have the level of resilience that water companies, for example, would have. And that's really the historical legacy of what we've inherited. But we're committed to doing what we can to invest in ensuring that our supply is available to support navigation and all the other vital uses it supports in the future, as far as we possibly can with the resources that we have.
Okay, thanks, Richard. I mean, there are clearly big challenges there. I'm going to take one more question, but we are pretty much out of time. And I'm aware of the fact that we've not been able to address every single question that has been sent in. So our commitment is that we will try to get back to everyone who has submitted a question, but that we've not had time to address live in this session today. So your questions will be answered, just I'm afraid not in this forum, because we are coming to the end of our time. But the last question I'm going to ask is about continuous cruising and minimum distance. And this is from Pamela Smith, who's the chair of the National Bargee Travellers Association. Now, Pamela kind of frames her question in view of the increasing occurrence of drought and storm damage and unplanned repair stoppages. Is there at any point in the Trust continuing its policy of demanding that every boater without a home mooring must travel a range of at least 20 miles in their licence period?
To answer the latter part of that question first, David, I guess it's important to clarify that it's not so much a policy of the Trust. There's clearly legislation that governs how boat licensing is applied. And there is an obligation on boaters without a home to bona fide navigate, which means, I think, with good faith, and that's what we then attempt to clarify in the guidance that we give. So, as Pamela knows, we've talked about it many times in the past, it is our firm view that under those licensing legislation, interpreted in our terms and conditions, it is necessary for boaters without a home mooring to navigate, to be on a continuous journey, and that we set some guidance to help people understand what that means. And the guidance says that if you're not travelling a range of more than 20 miles, then you're unlikely to be meeting the criteria necessary for bona fide navigation. So it's intended to help give that clarification to people. Now, of course, we do understand where there are special circumstances where there are closures, either because of a failure of an asset or because of a water supply issue. Then, of course, it would be necessary for boaters to have extended stays until the situation is resolved and they can move on. But that shouldn't change the underlying point for all boaters without a home mooring to undertake navigation. That I think is clear in the terms and conditions that all such boat licence holders sign up to when they adopt that option for their boat licensing. Of course, the alternative is to take on a permanent mooring, and I think those make that choice. But having selected the option not to have a home mooring, it is necessary for the benefit of all the other users who want to use the canal to be on a continuous journey as required by legislation.
Okay, thank you for that, Richard, and thank you to everyone for the questions that you've submitted. As I say, the questions that haven't yet been answered, we will be getting in touch to provide answers to those questions and ensure that all the issues are addressed. I'm going to bring this public meeting now to a close. In doing so, first of all, I want to thank all of those of you who've been watching and taking part for doing so. And for your interest in our work, and for your support in the past, and what I hope and confidently expect will be your continuing support into the future. We are pleased to have the opportunity to answer some of the questions that people are raising. But the commitment of the Canal and River Trust is absolutely clear, and it is to ensure that our canals and waterways can be kept open for navigation, and that people can use the towpath for their leisure and enjoyment, and that these options should be open to as many people as possible, while protecting the heritage and the assets and the water security, which is all an integral part of what we do, and the mission that we were happy to take on and to develop into the future. I would like to thank everyone who's taken part today. I'd like to thank people who've asked questions. I'd like to thank Richard and his senior colleagues for their presentations, and Richard for his patience in answering some of the questions that have come in. And I'd also like to thank colleagues who've helped with the technical part of this, ensuring that it has been able to hold it in this way. And this event will remain on YouTube. So if you or friends, colleagues would like to catch up on your interest in our work, it will be there for people to look at again in the future. And finally, as a conclusion, we are going to play another short film, after which the event will be finished. So thank you again for your attendance and participation, and I look forward to meeting more people and working with you in the future.
More than 200 years ago, great engineers and thousands of navvies made something truly spectacular. They achieved feats of industrial engineering never encountered before, taking water up hills, across valleys, powering the industrial age. When they were creating this 2,000-mile network, the finest example of industrial heritage in the world, they could never have predicted the role that canals would still be playing in our lives over 2 centuries later. Stretching from London to Lancaster, Brecon to Boston, the former motorways of the nation are continuing to shape the lives of millions of people today, but in new, completely different and exciting ways. They're giving us somewhere we can live, relax, visit, get active, spend time together, get close to nature. Today there are more boats and people on the water than ever before. Our canals are not just about the past. They have the potential to help power our future too. They provide a vital source of water to help our crops grow. They're a source of renewable energy. They support a wide range of businesses and jobs. Using the energy stored in the water, they're helping to keep our cities cool and our homes warm. Broadband cables, gas pipes, electricity lines tucked under towpaths and bridges traverse the country, bringing energy into our houses and businesses. And making this happen is one charity, a charity powered by millions of supporters, Canal and River Trust. We are the people making life better by water. We are the charity that provides much needed green and blue spaces in our most built up areas. We are the charity caring for these historic, precious and fragile structures out in the open, exposed to the very worst that our weather and climate can throw at them. We are the engineers, the lock keepers, the litter pickers, keeping these waterways open and bringing them to life for boaters, for local communities, for you. Our amazing charity cares for these wonderful waterways, but more help is desperately needed. Your donations, your time, as well as the vital support from partners and government, if they are to survive and thrive. So we all have a back garden to call our own, a special place on our doorstep to use and enjoy. Together, we can make it happen. Together, we are Canal and River Trust, making life better by water.